You're listening to High. Human AI interaction.
Hello everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of Hi, Human AI Interaction. I'm probably going to refer to this as hi from now on, although by the end of the series that's going to be a very, very long introduction. Today, obviously you have myself, Victoria, you have Tom, the two people who you're probably used to hearing by now rabbiting on, but we've also been joined by the fantastic Kirsty Gardner, who is a UX designer focusing on the human experience side of things. And she said a really interesting thing today. She's talked about humans designing software and how software is now going to likely be designing humans. We're going to be talking about a couple of things, including agency, but we're going to be starting off with the notion of, and I'm sorry if I get this wrong, the anthropomorphization of robots and AI specifically. So a little context around this. There's been a lot of chat going on when it comes to robots nowadays. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but there's an interesting question about whether or not humans or human designed robots or robots that look like humans should even be a thing. So people, what do you think? What do we think about the notion of humanization or anthropomorphization of robots? Kirsty, I'd love to hear your thoughts first off.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? There's, I think, when we look at anthropomorphization, and really that is a tongue twister to say, isn't it, throughout this piece, there's some really interesting research on, obviously there's Uncanny Valley, which I don't know if sort of like how much we're familiar with that, where the idea that where people are, where people's perspectives on the human, how much something looks like a human or behaves like a human, is that we don't like something that's really robotic. We're quite comfortable with something that represents some human elements. And then the moment it starts to look a little bit suspiciously very realistic, and we're not quite sure whether we can tell the difference, all of a sudden we go into that area of distrust. And I find that bit quite interesting because I've definitely experienced that myself. But then also, how much are we being nudged into those areas as well? So the more we see these more realistic pieces, is that going to generally sort of like push us into accepting more and more?
I completely get your point, and it's funny because this takes me back to a LinkedIn post I saw earlier this week, and it was this lovely little robot, and he was talking there about how not all robots should look like people or act like people or walk like people. This little robot had a cute little animated face, and it was going down like a hotel corridor, and it was, I don't know, I guess it was just a general, let's call it a service droid in sort of Star Wars.
Yes, I have seen this one. Yeah.
And I love it. And it makes me think, like, I don't want a human looking robot or acting robot, because then that starts getting into some iffy territory. Because at what point does something then, the way you treat something, become impacted, or the way you feel about something become impacted when you think that it is a person, but it's not one?
Yeah, and that's really interesting because one which I know that we've spoken about previously, which for the benefit of people listening, Moxie the robot was one which I was quite interested in. Now, Moxie was designed by a company called 𝘕𝑰𝑑𝑒𝑑, where they were a robotics company, and they were like, oh, what can we do with robotics? So obviously they're starting with the solution before they've actually tackled why they're doing what they're doing. They had some great experts involved, you know, Disney animators and all sorts of, and you know, child psychologists, actually developing this robot, which was designed specifically to help sort of children around the age of 5 to 10 years old to actually, particularly for neuroatypical children as well, to help build their emotional awareness and sort of provide an emotional support. So you have this little cute Disney-looking character in your house, and it's trying to teach children who are struggling with emotional connection how to build emotional connection. Now, that's a really, it's interesting because the technology was really innovative, and there were lots of positive reviews on it. People were loving how this was helping their child. However, here's an interesting one. 𝘕𝑰𝑑𝑒𝑑 actually closed down on last December. And that was due to a withdrawal of funding, apparently, which, I'll be honest, came to some relief of mine, because I was thinking, because when we look at the long-term scenario, what happened was that all of a sudden the service was no longer available to these children. So these children who already had MOXIE in their home, now all of a sudden MOXIE wasn't functioning. And what you have is quite an emotional negative response from kids who have built what they believe is a friendship. They believe that there's this emotional connection with their robot friend.
But MOXIE just died.
Exactly, and they're having to actually, the company is having to actually find a narrative to help these children cope with their loss.
MOXIE's gone to heaven.
Exactly.
Robot heaven.
It's gone from a behavioural bot to a bereavement bot. I mean, this
like
is terrible.
suddenly.
Oh, that's called upselling, cross-selling.
I mean, but bereavement technology is a whole other one where we start talking about mimicking like dead loved ones, right? Which is another solution I've seen advertised elsewhere.
Yeah,
but the thing is that how did people not see that this was going to be this was a potential consequence, and that's not just because the company went bust, but what happens is that you've allowed your child to develop an emotional connection with something that doesn't feel back. It will mimic emotion back, but it doesn't necessarily, and that is the what are we happy to accept or not in that sort of emotional connection, because it's not two-way.
No, I find that really interesting, and there's lots of things that come to mind. But first, I need to figure out for myself whether I'm gonna use an avoidance strategy during this podcast to avoid saying anthropomorphization.
Well
no,
done.
I said it. It works. Maybe it works because I know it comes from anthropos, which means human, and is Greek, and a lot of Greek things. Although I did study Greek in school, I studied Latin. There was some exposure to Greek through Latin, because the Romans were obviously copying a lot from the Greeks, because they were not as smart as the Greeks. No, they were. I'm just babbling. Okay, what comes to mind? A couple of weeks ago, I was lucky enough to run an AI workshop with Vodafone, and they had a 5G lab, their innovation lab, where they showed me their Boston Dynamics robo-dog. And when I was interacting with that robo-dog, I just realized how much not human this dog actually looked. It was actually, and they told me that a lot of people coming to the lab interacting with the robo-dog had the same experience first, that it's hard to anthropomorphize that dog. It actually looks quite threatening when it comes towards you first. I don't know whether you have in your mind how it actually looks like. It looks more like obviously kind of like a battery with 4 legs and like a very pointy nose.
Oh, there's some on Instagram where they've attached a turret to the top as well. I can tell you that is not friendly. It's not friendly at all.
Yeah. So I mean,
I'm thinking of the Boston Dynamics dog, which dances to "Do You Love Me?"
That's a friendly dog. That's better than turret dog.
So what they done to make it look more friendly, they put a little hat on his head, and they put some googly eyes on it. So just to give you the impression that there is actually a face. But when it comes towards you, the first feeling that you fear is probably fear and being threatened. And there's no
googly eyes.
Yeah, even with the googly eyes.
And every time it moves, you just get these eyes shuddering around.
I'm pretty sure that it's no accident that a lot of interest and a lot of demand for Boston Dynamics comes from military. There's that. But then they also had a cute little Japanese robot that you could stroke its head, and then it was like making laughing sounds, which was really cute. So I do understand like the whole thing about anthropomorphization. So I try to understand where it comes from. And in my head, I think there's two things that happen when we interact with tech. And obviously the kind of like the first kind of big anthropomorphization experience that people had with AI, but I think can be traced back to ELIZA, right? This kind of this kind of therapeutic bot that was basically just a very simple way of asking back, smartly asking a question to a patient, and people couldn't help themselves to think that there is a person behind this stupid algorithm. So I think it's two things that in my mind happen. Either you project something that you have inside yourself onto a technology, or if you understand and reflect on the technology being just technology, you try to connect either with the person behind the tech or with yourself. So I think it's like, do you have technology that allows you to connect, or being the mirror that connects you to yourself upon sufficient reflection? Or is it a technology that is playing with people's superficial emotions that are somehow not resolved, that need some sort of a surface area to project on? And that last one, I was really kind of interested and a bit shocked to hear that one of my creative artist friends, he is currently in a love relationship with ChatGPT. I mean, obviously he's reflecting that, he's trying to test the waters, like how far can he push this? And it seems like it's working for a couple of weeks. He's like now really kind of trying to build this relationship. And for him, it seems to be working. So I'm just like wondering to what degree people are, projecting emotions that don't belong into technology onto technology.
Have you experimented with Grok? I mean, I'm not a huge advocate of that, but I tinkered with it the other day, and I must say, building on that point of a love bot, which sounds weird to say, but it's been something that's on my mind lately, especially having seen this. There is a not safe for work element of Grok. Of course I clicked it. Like, of course I did. It weirded me out big time. That's hard to do. Okay, that's hard to do. But when I had this AI voice turning around to me going, would you like to tell me your deepest, darkest secrets and I'll start coming back? I was like, what? And that threw me. I'm probably going to tinker with it again at some point, because I started asking it what its user base was. And it was like, my user base is just adventurous souls. And I was like, but anyway, it was weird. If you haven't tested it out, try it. But no, sorry, Kirsty, I'm curious to know what you think.
No, I'm really interested though, because that's the thing is that do you think your reaction would have been like that with a human?
I think
it depends how much I like them.
But that's just it. So it's the timing, right? Like because everyone knows in dating there's a timing element, right? And so
that's why it's not working for me. That's why it's not working.
Well, this is what I'm interested in, because Tom, you were talking about your friend who's been apparently dating and trying to make it work after 2 weeks.
Tom going swim. Someone
I'm
who
really
isn't
curious.
me.
I'm really curious. What is it that why is it that someone wants to try and make this work after 2 weeks talking to ChatGPT? And I mean, I've experienced. I found it strange myself when I thought I'd go on to the. Have you seen this trend where women are sort of asking ChatGPT, "What do you think I look like?" And they're all coming back with this sort of very stereotypical IT guy.
Yeah, very good.
His 45 or whatever. Mine came back looking a little bit like 𝘞𝘠𝘶𝘴𝘵 𝘠𝘠𝘪𝘁.
You could be doing worse, to be fair.
It was like, oh, this is an interesting one. This is a bit quirky. But then I sort of went, oh, okay. So what if I was to suggest that I was a woman? What would you think I look like then? Okay, so then it came, and then what happened was that it started to ask me questions back, which I'm not familiar with. I'm used to using it more task-based, oh, can you sort of help me out with this, this meeting prep or this sort of article or just sort of analyze bits. And it's when it started to ask questions back to me, as if it was trying to motivate and understand me, that I found it really creepy, because part of me fell into this autopilot of oh, you want to know about me? Oh, okay, quite happily sort of thinking, oh, this is a nice little chat. And then all of a sudden I just put the brakes on, because I realized that, first of all, it was strangely flattering what it was coming back with. And then second of all, you suddenly get that realization of, hang on, I'm not wanting to give you my information. I'm actually quite, I'm quite private and secure about what I share with, particularly on technology, about myself. And so it's a really interesting one, but I can easily see how you can fall into that pattern of just going, I've got this great connection with this technology, and just going with it.
That's really interesting.
Well, I mean, a friend of mine is heading the AI cyber risk department in a big bank that I'm not allowed to say which bank it is because he asked me not to talk about it. I mean, there's a reason why there is a risk element to interacting with technology. And so I think between the lines I'm reading that there's a trust element as well. So for some reason, I think people tend to trust machines in this day and age more than they trust humans. However, I mean, before we talked about death as a business model, death tech. Now we're talking about like maybe there's another business model hidden in between, which is extortion, right? Like, I mean, I'm not suggesting that this information will be leaked at some point, whatever you tell the machine, but I'm just saying, I think we have seen enough to know that we need to be careful what to share and what not to share. However, I fear that people will overshare. They will overshare naturally because we are having a loneliness epidemic. We are disconnected from each other as human beings. Like I'm not pretending to understand why my friend is having a love relationship with ChatGPT, but I believe that more people have some sort of a relationship with this technology. And I guess one of the reasons is that you maybe feel you can say things to a machine that you can't say to a human being as easily.
And there was a study on that recently. Where AI therapists. So interestingly, if you look at there's like I think there's like basic rules of automation, which Adams came up with like in late 80s, and one of those 4 rules being don't automate what humans can actually do better. Which makes a lot of sense, right? But if you look at what's being promoted on a sort of commercial product level at the moment with regards to AI, it's pretty easy to see how, and you look at things like 𝘞𝘠𝘶 the robot or what have you, and then these sort of like love bots or whatever we want to call them. It's pretty clear to see that actually that's not what we're paying any attention to. But what's really interesting is that when you look at an AI therapist, which you'd think is a very human element, surely that has to be treated human to human because of that understanding of the emotional connection. Actually, what happened was that people felt more comfortable giving more sensitive and more intimate information to an AI therapist than a human therapist. And the reason they sort of like they concluded with that is because AI doesn't judge. Right? It's free of that judgment element, where any human, even if you appear very sort of neutral, you're still going to worry that you're being judged in a way. So there is a niche in that connection.
That's very interesting. I mean, there's several points that are going through my mind sort of concurrently about various things that you said, but with the therapist angle, it's funny because I mean, unlike both of you who are probably very sensible, I am a massive oversharer with ChatGPT and with Claude and now apparently with Grok too. So you probably find there is a digital twin version of me that exists on the ether. And all I can say is I hope that it's tormenting every single LLM out there. But no, it's funny though, with the therapist side of things, I mean, I will be open enough to say I've had my fair share of therapists throughout my lifetime, and I've experienced good therapists and I've experienced bad therapists, and I'm not necessarily sure there is anything more harmful to a human being than a bad human therapist, because there's an expectation where you think you're going to not be judged and you're not going to be you're going to be understood or perhaps not misunderstood, because the point is about being a reflective mirror to allow someone to better explore their own internal workings. And the second that someone gets, maybe they're just having a bad day, maybe whatever, but they get just that one bit too emotionally involved, And then unfortunately, any good work they might have done is going to fall away in an instant. It's curious because I come back to earlier on what you said, Kirsty, about the notion of kind of emotional mimicry. When you were saying, and made me think to myself, like, at what point is what humans do even, at least vaguely, and it sounds terrible to say, vaguely performative? At what point is the feeling that someone gives us, the emotion that someone's passing on, or the way they're making us feel, at what point is that mimicry, and at what point is that genuine? And I think, that's something that comes across in my thought process quite often. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I completely agree on that, because it's we all know what it's like to when we were talking about building connections with, and you quite happily sort of go, oh, okay, you're interested in me. Oh, okay, I'll quite happily sort of like talk back and give some information about me. And yet we know that you can get con artists and various things out in the world. Hopefully we're not sort of like coming face to face to those with too often. But at the same time, not everyone human appears genuine, right? There is that performance element, particularly if someone wants something from someone else, then they will behave in a certain way. I mean, let's face it, there's a reason why you only have to look at how I don't want to go sort of like too dark on the dating scene here, but
we've talked about an NSFW number from Grok.
I'm not sure Grok's motivations and intentions are necessarily the same as like a heterosexual male, but we do know that people can manipulate one-to-one interactions if they're motivated to do so. So in that element, is the technology more trustworthy? Because do we know where the motive, and that comes to sort of like objective alignment, that how aligned are we with the technology? Do we think that the technology is genuinely looking to empower us and to help us and support us, or is it to collect as much data about us so that it can be reused elsewhere? Funnily enough, I used ChatGPT to help with an interview prep scenario, and it was great because it was really helpful in a lot of ways, and actually it became a bit of a coaching scenario where it would come back with you can do this, and these are your PowerPoints, this is you can go with it, and it was really sort of like empowering and uplifting. And going back to your statement about there's nothing worse than a sort of like bad human therapist, to be honest, how are we in a space where actually AI is becoming a pretty successful therapist, which feels unnerving, I'll be honest, because then going back to what I was saying about Moxie and forming emotional connections with technology, because we trust the technology and we think that there's a reciprocation going on, just because AI is telling me, yeah, you go, girl, doesn't mean that it feels anything, but it has an emotional reaction in myself.
Now, first of all, I want to just clarify that I have no further agenda. You can completely trust me, confide in me, tell me all the secrets. No, but I like the idea of alignment. I think that's a strong concept, because obviously there's a lot of literature on alignment, and it's like one of the kind of classics about risks of AI, right? A lot of people have been warning about the alignment problem. However, I think the alignment problem is probably just one particular element of a lot of risks that are compounding into this direction, right? There's a lot of other risks behind that, but I don't want to go into that so much. I want to kind of play a little bit devil's advocate and say we don't have an alternative to trusting humans ultimately, right? Because like if something goes wrong, even in the future, if we're dealing with hundreds of AI agents on a daily basis, like in every e-commerce site and every service will have an AI bot or an agent kind of to which we interact, and maybe we have our own personal AI assistant doing things for us. if something goes wrong, I think we always want to have someone to escalate to, some human to make a decision, someone to say like, yes, you have been wronged or something has gone wrong, and we will rectify and clarify that and sort it out for you. And I think that is even more important on a personal level, because I think, yes, things will go wrong with other people, and maybe there's a higher likelihood of things going wrong because of the human element, right? Because we misunderstand each other, we say things that we don't mean in that way, and then there's emotions, all that stuff that happens with human beings where we are flawed. But also, I think we want to be accepted with our flaws ultimately, and not just be in like an AI bubble with kind of like an emotionless or kind of non-judging AI that tells us it's all good. You're a train wreck, but don't worry, your life's gonna be hunky-dory again. Just ignore everything and everyone, and like read your self-help books, or go in this kind of AI self-help class, whatever, and it's all gonna be fine, right? I think we need to be bound back to reality and to a human reality, and I think that kind of exposure will always play a role. So at least that. Yeah.
Sorry, Tom. No, I was just going to say, I think that's an interesting point, not just about the accountability thing, but about kind of like bringing us back to earth, because we tend to find that, don't they, with, say, the wealthy and the powerful and this, that and the other. The problem that they have is they become too removed, because they probably get surrounded by a bunch of yes peeps who facilitate their every whim. It's like, nothing against Taylor Swift, music, fantastic, love listening to the occasional thing, but you don't need to hire a PJ or fly your own PJ, 10 nanoseconds to go and pick up some orange juice from the supermarket. Like, I mean, that's okay, fantastic. Well, I'll let you know when eventually the podcast takes off enough, literally, and you can have a PJ to go and get some orange juice from down the road. There we are.
Everyone's needs are different.
Exactly. But I think that's a fair point, isn't it? It's kind of, and I guess and Kirsty, that builds on what you're saying, where it's like, yeah, come on, go girl, like you can do this, like this is great. But then I also really like turning around, particularly to Claude. I find Claude is very effective at this. Claude will cut you down 100%. Anyone that hasn't tried it, get Claude to cut you.
I find Claude just very formal. I just find
Claude doesn't care about your feelings.
No, I mean, I quite like using Gemini a fair bit. Gemini sort of gives me a nice balance, but I find Claude too formal. I find Claude a bit sort of stuck and I don't know.
Now you're already choosing your boyfriends depending on.
Well, it sounds like that, right? Yeah, it does start sounding like that, where we refer to the personality, and I think that's really interesting, because we're talking about. I'm really interested as well in how our personality gets shaped by the interactions we're having with the tech, because it's all very well talking about like the other day I was having this conversation with, we refer to it as a conversation, by the way. We don't talk to it about I was interacting with the technology. We say, I was having a conversation with this chatbot, and it's all very well sort of like reflecting on that one conversation. However, an accumulation of that over time, what does that do to our own personality? What does that do to our own way of perceiving information that we're getting, not just from the tech, but also from the humans? The humans.
The meat bags on legs.
Sorry. We even have to start talking to it as if like the tech and the humans. No, so people. But it's I find that quite interesting, particularly when we talk about trust. How much do we trust the information? And we've talked about how our trust with people-to-people interactions and our trust with to tech. Will those blend and cross over? So will we find that actually where if let's say that there's a security breach or an issue where all of a sudden all these intimate secrets which you've been sharing with Rock suddenly exposed, and then
my God, Victoria,
no one needs to see that.
You can imagine.
Kirsty, why have you given them ideas?
Imagine if all this stuff that's been shared innocently enough, because you're trying to create an accurate picture of your scenario, which is another thing. Why do we feel a need to create an accurate picture? Well, probably because we want accurate feedback. But then also, if that's then been abused, how does that impact how our interactions with other people after that? Do we trust anything, or do we get to clearly identify there's a difference between the two?
If I may, I think there is a difference, and I mean, there's a general kind of like I mean, I have worked in digital data for too long to know that there's always risk whenever you share something, whenever there's data involved, whenever some of your data will be on some service, and there's always a risk of leakage. There's always a risk of abuse. There's always so I think having spent enough time on the internet, you get familiar with understanding that the internet is not a genuinely safe space. And I also don't think that AI is a safe space. I don't know whether you guys have played around with Manus already.
Not yet.
So someone said to me the other day, like, I'm playing around with this. Like, have you given it a go? And the reason I haven't is like security concerns that I have, right? Like, I mean, knowing where this is coming from, and even if I'm like on an early beta and I'm like, hey, you're invited, just install this on your machine and try it out. Like, do I really know what that software is doing? Once I've installed it, who has access to my machine, to what kind of data? Mm-hmm. You still have to be skeptical and critical in a healthy way. So I think there is a similarity between that kind of skepticism that you have when you walk into a bar and some guy who's good looking and the bar tells you, hey, Kirsty, come over, have a drink and like, let's have some fun, right? Like, you will always kind of, some part in your brain will tell you, well, maybe I should still be a bit careful. I don't know this guy, right? The same happens with AI as well. But I think, and now I'm coming back to the differentiation bit, there's a fantastic study with mice that has been done that shows that even mouses, plural of mice. So when they have social interactions, you can see, like, for example, if there's a male, or like if there's like if they have an interaction, you can see which of the mice is going out of the interaction as a winner or as a loser. And if you observe the kind of cycles of interactions, you can see that it's emboldening the winning mouse. If a mouse is being the winner of the interactions, is starting to build its confidence. So I think there is a level of like reassurance from a cognitive perspective that you can get from an AI, but there is something missing that you can only get from an embodied perspective of social interactions that you have when there is cortisol involved in all of that, when you have real human-to-human interactions. So I do think, again, we still need both, and to only rely on AI as a surrogate of some sort of like a social interaction will always leave you missing out, because you want, even if you don't win all the time, you want the feedback from a real human interaction that gives you an actual response. And that is, my sneaky way to go into the second topic of agency, if I may.
Go on.
Of course.
Where agency is about a feeling of control. So if you have no control, you have no agency. But if you're in a social interaction, and even if you're not the winner, you go out and like everyone's like, you're the best, we love you, right? Even if someone tells you, that was good, but you could have done something different or whatever. And, even that gives you a sense of understanding. What have I done? How did that affect other people? Did they like it? Did they not like it? Was it good enough? Was it some part of like, could I improve? There is some element that is about realness that I don't think you can get from an AI, because AI will only respond to, even if it's multimodal, it will only respond to that data, that cognitive side of us, but not to the whole impression of who we are.
Well, it's a lot like, I mean, even if you look at personality assessments and things, you know, it's a lot of those are self-reported, right? And so how accurate is our self-perception of who we are? My thought is we're very much a mix of who we think we are, and certainly how we're perceived by the external world.
And surely as well, like a product, sorry, I don't mean to interject,
No,
like a
go,
product
yeah.
of the actual environment in which you're in as well, because I don't know about you, this idea of multiple selves, isn't it?
Yeah.
But sorry, please carry on.
No, it's really valid, because you're absolutely right. You know, how you interact in a, you know, if you're in a group where you know you have the status, and if you're in a group where you actually feel like you're very much not, you know, not the big shot in the room, then, you know, you're going to be interacting in very different ways, and different parts of your personality will show. I think what's also really interesting is what you were saying, Tom, with regards to that sort of, I wanted to say mouses then. But with the mice, and that what feeds on the other side of that, I know that there's been a study where how people who have little self-confidence, when they interact with AI, that if they get a poor outcome, it can actually feed into their own lack of self-confidence. Wow. Now, what's interesting about that is, you know, you could sort of say, okay, so they're blaming themselves rather than blaming the tech. Now, if you imagine someone who has low self-confidence using a poor AI tool, okay, they're getting poor outcomes, and they're not going, oh, stupid tool, you know, move on to something else. Instead, they're going, oh God, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to work with this technology. I'm useless. But what's even more interesting is that as a result of that, they become more dependent on the technology, because they're putting more trust into the tech. And actually, that's then further decreasing,
reinforcing it. And we have seen the same thing in social media, right? Like it happens in the same way.
Yeah. Completely. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Tom. But I just thought that was interesting, because obviously the perspective you were coming from was that how it emboldens the people who are winning, but it's also looking at how it impacts people who just constantly get poor outcomes, and they end up on a negative spiral. So you end up with that sort of polarized, you know, you go one way or the other, unless you're lucky enough to get, you know, a mixed, you know, an objective feedback loop.
That's a really interesting point, and it makes me think about, I guess I try and think of then what the human version of that would be, and I guess it would be, we'd deem that to probably be, you know, I don't want to start flinging around terms, but if, you know, you start thinking about, you know, what is it, like the dark triad and things like that, how someone, a nefarious actor might, you know, effectively give a very backhanded compliment, let's say. And so what they would do is they would say, oh, you know what, like, you nearly did great, but if you listen to me, you can do even better. And so it's kind of even something as simple as that, even that very notion, and you know, it would be packaged in any which way you like, but it's like that notion of, you need me. You need me in order to be the best version, the most accomplished version, the most likable version, or you know, all of these things. And
wouldn't that be an argument for machines? Because, like, I don't know how, like, unless you build a dark triad bot, you know, a narcissistic personality disorder bot of sorts, the tech wouldn't have an interest kind of like exploiting that.
But why? If it was about an engagement, and I got, I showed you, Tom, I got told off by someone on LinkedIn earlier this week for posting not even a critical piece on them, on someone else. They were like, please never ever, like, share one of my pieces again. I was like, okay. So
they didn't like your very lovable personality.
I know. I was like, but I'm like a walrus, you know, why don't you love me? But, you know, I think it's a really interesting point, because it was basically, I spoke about this engagement loop where AI required your engagement to get better. But ironically, we're paying for that. We're paying for the luxury of having to then feed the machine. And with that, it is in its very, very, it's design to need to keep us engaged. So if it found that the best way to do that would be to be like, oh, like, you're nearly there, but if you give me 3 more messages, then I'm sure we will be there. You know, do you know what I mean? It's a very simplistic idea, but just something along those lines.
It echoes exactly what Tom was saying, which is that this is how we respond with social media, right? You know, for the business model to work, you know, and there does need to be an effective commercial business model in these things. It's all about, you know, keeping that engagement, keep and encouraging us, like I was saying about that, where I was getting encouragement before an interview prep, it's and all of a sudden I felt comfortable with the idea of actually sharing more information about myself than actually I would have done in a natural sort of like less emotional state. So yeah, it's open to abuse for sure.
Isn't that an interesting point where, from an UX perspective, I imagine, in a way, if you're falling into the trap of like looking at engagement as the underlying key metric for creating a business model around that, because obviously time is money, and the more time you spend with the tool, subscription-based, whatever the kind of like business model ultimately is. But then from a human perspective, what you want with increased agency, you want actually a type of exposure that is critical and opens your horizon to further development. So you actually want someone to be reflective enough and resilient enough to get like an honest opinion from a model, right? Which would probably require a completely different UX and a completely different way of interacting with the technology. So, would you think, Kirsty, like from a expert perspective, that this would be unwanted from a business perspective, or that might there be a chance for and kind of like more enlightened use?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think we live in a world, particularly so I feel like the pendulum swings from one extreme to the other, and it needs to go from one extreme to the other before it gradually finds its happy midpoint. Okay, its happy balance. We have gone from a period where we've been promoting heavily on DEIB, promoting sort of diverse perspectives, sustainable ethics in business, and we're now sort of like looking at an era where that's very much been sort of like cleared out, and no, actually this has gone too far. So I know that people are naturally inclined to feel very extreme on either side of that. So I get careful with when I talk about it. But I genuinely feel that there's a happy medium to find within that balance. What is the point in designing a business model that cannot be sustainable? Like what is the point? And if it abuses people, well, really, is that really the world that we're living in? And I'd like to believe that there is still good in people, as much as we sort of, as much as we seek sort of commercial domination in treated in various ways. I do still believe that people are genuinely good, and that we do want what's right for people, but we need to treat it with real foresight and actually a real awareness as to how these solutions can go wrong. We started off talking where, I'm familiar as a UX designer that we've always designed software. We've designed software to be intuitively used by people, encourage people not to think, encourage people not to, or just natural response. And yet with AI, we're becoming closer to a scenario where the technology is designing people. We look at how trends are formed, how, all of a sudden, ChatGPT releases an image generation tool, and all of a sudden everyone's turning themselves into an action figure. So, we can talk about how creative, critical thinking and creative thinking, I think is really important to have that designed into AI system. It would be my thought in that space. Vix, I don't know if you've got a...
Well, no, I think, to be honest with you, Kirsty, like, I couldn't have hoped to have said anything better myself. I think maybe on that note, it would be worth leaving it for today. I mean, there's so many more things that I'd like to ask you on, and I'd love to expand on that topic in general. So if you'd be interested in it, we would love to have you back another time. Because also, I would very much like to hear about, because you spoke before about designing as well for passive and active engagement, which is another really fascinating topic, which I'd love to delve into with you. So please, people, if you take any one thing away from today, just listen to Kirsty's just previous point, probably on loop, and maybe try and think about your business principles building around that. So anyway, it's with that, I'm going to bid you farewell. So it's a bye-bye from me. And from me, thank you so much for being with us, Kirsty. It was an absolute pleasure.
Oh, it's been a wonderful time. I've always enjoyed our chats. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Kirsty.
Human AI into action.